my body's being lifted, like the center of my stomach's being lifted up, and then my sleeping bag was being unzipped all at the same time. I was like trying to scream out, help me, but nobody came to my aid.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, epic humans of the world, and welcome back to Shared Ingredients. I'm your host, Andrew Pelosi, and on this episode, I meet with the iconic Kassem G. Kassem is a good friend of mine who I met in the early days of Maker Studios. He was one of the pioneers and first top channels on YouTube, making comedic on-the-street content, crazy interview shows. He's done so many wild things on YouTube over the years that have gone completely bananas. He was the king of Comic-Con. You could not go to Comic-Con without seeing this guy take over the best, most awkward form of interviews. He's an overall hilarious guy, good guy, who's now a host on the relaunched G4 TV network. He's also a co-host with Jamie and Rob on Pajama Pants Podcast, which is fantastic. Kassem is one of those all-time great, multifaceted, talented guys who has so many interests, and he's really good at a lot of them. He's a good tennis player. He has a crazy off-roading truck. All these things you may not know about him that are part of his story. I don't even think we really get into them in this podcast. All I can say is he's a super dynamic human doing a lot of amazing things, full of good laughs, insight, and inspiration. Let's get into it. Yay! I'm joined today by my good friend, Kassem G, who is a complete pioneer, entrepreneur, Renaissance man. He's built businesses. He's made a lot of people smile. He's made a lot of people laugh. Most importantly, he's just a good human. So I'm glad to be talking to him. And you can see me in one of my favorite t-shirts, which is hard to visualize, but it's Kassem as a young man, as a handsome young man. But the shirt has a double effect where the t-shirt he's wearing as a child has been replicated by the fine folks at Knock Steady or Maker Shop or whatever it was branded as.
Yeah.
I don't know.
My Kassem. One piece of merch. Thank you. That was such a lovely intro. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, that was my one piece of merch that I ever sold. And I remember, they were trying to get me to do merch for so long. And I was like, well, okay, I had that idea for that shirt. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is how I want it to be. I want it to be a pocket tee. I want it to have this graphic on it. And I want it to like feel soft. And they were like, yeah, but everything you want, this is going to be like a $30 shirt. And we don't do $30 shirts. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, then I don't really want to do the shirt if it's not what I feel like I would want to sell. And there was this whole push-pull thing. And I was like, I don't even want to sell it, but I'm glad I did. And I'm glad I pushed back because everyone that I gave those shirts to still have them because they're super soft. And it's just like it's a weird shirt, especially when you walk around with like a little boy on your pocket tee. I've had people tell me there's some awkward interactions, but I'm glad I could make it overall.
I love it.
Yeah. And I'm wearing, look, so before the pod started, I had this shirt on and then I got in my head I'm like, don't wear the dude's brand on his own pod. No one wants to see that. And then I caught you on the Zoom and then you were wearing that and then I had to go quickly change, but we almost had a super serendipitous moment here. I
appreciate it. I still think it matters. We can edit out these things if needed. So it's going to look organic. So I want to take it way back. Like my whole philosophy in life is that, like you're just a dynamic human doing a lot of interesting things, but I feel like a lot of people will sort of look at someone's career and what they got really known for in a short period of time and kind of classify them. And so, for example, people will say like OG YouTuber. And I never used the word YouTuber because I felt like people on the platform in the early days were comedians, were personalities, were just talented individuals who amassed an audience. What's your opinion on that term? Or how would you define that chapter in your life when you started to get known for your craft on YouTube?
Yeah. That question I feel like changes every year. I think when it first, like in the early 2010s, I railed against it. I was like embarrassed by it, because when I started, I tried to I was like doing stand up and I wanted to be like, I wanted to take that long road through comedy, which was just getting up on stage and doing sets and like hoping one day somebody, you catch somebody's eye and then you end up on a thing. And lucky for me, I kind of like fell on the whole YouTube thing, but because of that, I always initially felt a little embarrassed by that term YouTuber, and because it was a kind of a catch-all for anyone online, and I didn't really feel like I should be categorized the same way somebody who like eats cereal out of a bathtub or like does pranks, like I don't like, just not that any of that stuff is bad or not as good or I'm better than, it's just different. And I felt like it was didn't really describe what I did. Now, that part it's kind of in the rear view, and like there's a sentimentality that I have towards those early days. And I don't really have a problem with people that like found me that way. I'm super thankful that that's how I was exposed to a lot of people, was through YouTube. And now the term has a little bit more legitimacy, minus like a few like kind of bad actors in the landscape. But yeah, I and especially since all those stand-ups and all, everyone that I put on a pedestal in the early days, they all eventually came to the site, to YouTube anyways, and they all do the same thing, and like now I know like a ton of stand-ups that'll do stand-up and then they'll come home and then they'll stream on Twitch, and like there's just no sort of feeling behind it anymore, like it was, or in the early days. I'd get friends who are like, there were comics who are like, what are you doing on that site? Like, get off there. That's a place for cats, or, it's a place for music parody. And, it just, I spent a lot of time, I think, in my head about it when I should have just been, grateful for the opportunity and happy to not be doing stand-up in a room full of like, or not full, with like 8 people in it. So, yeah, every year it changes.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's a good answer. I have a lot of questions on the origin story that we'll get into, but going back, like take people who don't know you to somewhat of the beginning.
Sure. I was born in Jordan, and I lived there for about 6 months until my dad. So my dad was in hotel management, hospitality. So his job kind of took us all over, and it started in Saudi Arabia. We lived in Saudi Arabia for the first 4 years of my life. And then we moved. So he got a visa, which really changed our whole life. He was able to kind of move his family from the Middle East to the United States. And because he was useful and he was an asset, and he was valued in the company. And so we came and lived in Florida, specifically Kissimmee. And if you're from Florida, that's not somewhere you want to live, and but it was all we knew. And I was coming from Saudi Arabia, so like it's all good, and then so we lived there from 87 to 93. And then I think right after Hurricane Andrew happened, we moved to Southern California on another promotion that he got. And that summer was like the Northridge earthquake. So we came from like Hurricane Andrew, boom, right to the Northridge earthquake. And, my mom for a while thought we were just bad luck. And yeah, I stayed. So I turned 18 and I was working at Best Buy. A lot of people know that. It's a big part of my story. And I moved out and started, renting an apartment with some folks I lived with. And they ended up moving. They moved to Orange County and then Hawaii. And they were in Hawaii up until 2 years ago. And they took my brother with them. And then he ended up coming back later on. But I stayed in Southern California and moved from the suburbs to the west side of LA. And basically that was just to like audition and try and take whatever it was I was doing a little more seriously. And because driving an hour outside the city to and from, a few times a week is, I can't believe it. I mean, I guess I really was into the idea of it, but like I couldn't imagine doing that now. But I'm glad it all worked out. But yeah, so I ended up essentially just moving to Santa Monica, renting a place, and then eventually moving to Venice. And I got into YouTube. It was really weird how it happened. I hired a guy at Best Buy when I worked out there, and he, in the interview, told me that, and his name's Corey Williams, and some people from early YouTube know who he is, SMP Films. And so he, in the interview, was telling me how he had this viral cat video that he made, and had all these millions of views, and he was making like however much money like a month just from this one video. And and that's kind of like, when you're, in terms that I understood, it was like residuals. He was making money on a monthly basis on this one thing he did. And like, that's like, that to me is the dream, is that mailbox money, that passive income that you just tap into. And I was fascinated, and I had a YouTube account at the time, but I really didn't know it was a place for anything other than, cat stuff. Or like, at the time I was putting up like my very, young and bad stand-up stuff. And he showed me like, hey, no, there's like a whole community of people here. They, you can interact with them. It's different than like TV or, film in the way that, because your audience can actually like leave comments and you can reply back. And so he would put me in his videos, and those would get like 100,000 views in like a day or two. And I was doing stand-up part-time, and like going to do stand-up for like a half-filled room, and then like going, kind of like driving home dejected, and going home and like looking at the YouTube clip you were in that had like 200,000 views, was like, oh, like I mean, I'm not a super smart guy, but I could tell that there was one place where the energy could be focused, and things might be happening in that one area. And so I kind of went a little hard in the paint with YouTube, and I started meeting people and toying around with like videos. And it's essentially that's what everyone my age, then I was like in my early 20s, that's what people do now. They all have like, and back then there were no iPhones, but like it had like just come out, but nobody was like really editing videos on, and making. Now everyone does it on their phone and uploads it. But back then it was I was real lucky to be shown that there was this sort of thing that you could do, and if I did it long enough, it would pay off. And so I just kept toying around with formats, and then I met people, and I one day on a whim did this sort of man on the street in Venice and in Santa Monica for Philip DeFranco, who has a news show. And I was like, I called Phil one day. I was like, hey, if you tell me one of the news topics that you are going to talk about in today's or tomorrow's show, I can go do like a quick man on the street thing. And then you could insert it almost like a field piece that you throw to. And so he was like, yeah, okay, we're going to be talking about, it was Miss California she had like some like saucy like pics that were, leaked online or something. And then, and she had this wholesome image or whatever, but I just went and asked people what their thoughts were. At the end of the day, I like borrowed a camera, went to Radio Shack, grabbed a wired mic, didn't know how to white balance a camera. That video was completely blown out. You honestly couldn't see more than me and the person, and everything behind it was like just like crushing white. And but I came home and I edited like a 45 second clip of it, And he was like, yeah, you don't know how to work a camera, but yeah, everything else is great. And then he put it in the show. And then like overnight, I doubled the amount of subscribers I had. I had maybe like 7,000, 8,000 subscribers before that day. And the next day I had like 16, and it was a pretty big moment. And my YouTube career is just kind of filled with those moments. You kind of like work hard and doing a podcast now, I notice the same thing. It's like you're kind of plateaued, and then you just keep doing it, and then you'll get the right guest or a clip will catch on, and then you'll shoot up, and then you'll get views and listeners, and then you'll level off again. And that's essentially it rewards consistency, which overall in my career, I wasn't that great at, to be honest. But yeah, so I just took advantage of that and just kept doing more man on the street, and eventually branched out into a bunch of other types of videos. And I did a lot of sketch, and I was a big fan of sketch comedy, and like the people I thought were real funny, I tried to like work with. And yeah, so I just did a lot of that on YouTube for a good, 5-6 years, until I started to like really feel it, and then kind of had to pull away. But I mean, that's the long-winded short story.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. It's a rad story. I mean, obviously you left out the part about being, what?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So, amongst all that, me and friends I had met along the way, we started a production company. It was essentially just a space that we had a green screen, had cameras, it had props and wardrobe, and like it was a place so we could all share, because we were all kind of like leaning on each other, because some of us could do other things better, and like we needed this, and some of us could shoot, and some of us could edit, and some of us could write. And we all this small group of us decided to share a space in Venice that was essentially like a mini studio production office. And we all kind of joined forces on this one YouTube channel, and then that YouTube channel like rose really fast. I think at the time it was like the fastest growing YouTube channel. And essentially that was like the seed of what they now call multi-channel networks. But we were kind of like, we kind of did it not on purpose and not for the reason that it ended up existing, but we essentially just wanted a place where we could be creative together in a space. And, eventually it created some sort of buzz, and investors came on. And then we had, we had an ad sales department, and that's how I met you. And we had, the company just kept growing and growing and growing, and it eventually sold. And if I say like that was the purpose of it, I would be lying. It all kind of just happened, and like it just like grew too big for essentially what we started it to be. And but it afforded us, like, it was great because we got paid out on our shares, and it allowed us to kind of live a more comfortable existence. And it was important to me because it's exhausting making videos online, especially on YouTube, and you're constantly like in front of everyone that can just comment on like what they think of you. And and if you're like, and I was like an undercooked 25-year-old and like emotionally not there, and like that stuff's super brutal. And some people were cut out for it, and honestly, I wasn't. And so I really had to like scale back and ask myself kind of what it was that I was enjoying about it, or was this something I really wanted to do? And yeah, it was great. But yeah, the company ended up, being sold, and it was, it made all kinds of news, and it was a cool moment, and yeah, it allowed us, the best part, it was meeting guys like you. Like there's people that I met along the way that I still keep in contact with, and they're like high quality, like real solid people that I don't think I would have necessarily come across. And that's been kind of the biggest gift, and still people that I can call on today for help, like you're helping me out with some merch stuff that I had questions about. And like, there's just so many talented folks that were working there in this short window of time. And if you ask most people, there was like, yeah, some people have different feelings about it. It was like, oh, so it got so corporate and got this and that. But like for a small window of time, you would walk into one of our offices or our one office at the one time, and you could walk in and like, there's like a goat being walked through, there's like a dude in a tutu. There's like, backup dancers over here. There's, like dude doing like unicycle tricks. And then there's an editing suite, and then there's writers, and then the LA Times is in there like writing. And I mean, it was just one of those small windows where you just look back and you go like, that was cool. That was something that I miss, and that's something that I think people try and duplicate, but I don't think you can really. I think it just happened because it happened. We weren't trying to like do that on purpose. When we saw what was happening, we tried to like feed it a little bit, but yeah, it was super organic and, but in the best way, I think.
Yeah. Thanks for that, for the kind words and for the recollection. I mean, I have so many positive memories. First of all, the company he's talking about, to anybody who's listening, is Maker Studios, and the channel that he was talking about is
so bad.
No. This is not a PR plug for a company that's defunct, but it was Maker Studios, and the station was the channel. I was actually asking you to go back to talk about how you gave up your Jordanian American tennis career, but that's neither here nor there. You decided to go the Maker direction. Right. But look, that was a super special time, and I'm grateful to have met you and so many good people. And I think that there was a period there where like you would walk into Rainbow Acres and like everyone was there. It was like our cafeteria. We were on, for anyone listening, we were on Washington Boulevard in Culver, or I guess Venice, Culver border. Yeah. And it was like a really scrappy office. Like it was probably like a Class C office space. I have so many funny memories. There was a memory where we were above a nail salon.
Yeah.
A nail salon and a timeshare. And they were both like really, really not so glamorous. Yeah. And like you'd come into the office and it would smell like a nail salon because the vent would go up into the room that I would sit in. And I couldn't stop hearing the phone calls that the people were making. And it was like a timeshare realty place below us. And one of the better or worse decisions that I made was like trying to show guys like yourself, you weren't in the room this day. I kind of came in as like one of the first business people, but I like wanted everyone to know I also super interested in creative. And so I prank called the place downstairs, and it was like one of my most proud prank calls. I was calling the realty place, but the amateur move was that I didn't block the number. And I basically called them with the thesis being that like I wanted to buy as much of their portfolio as they could sell me. And I got these ladies so excited, only to have them call us, not only realize that the phone number they were calling was above them, but then come up because they were so upset that we had like wasted their time. And I was like, I literally thought I was going to get fired, but you can't get fired from a company that's like you and your friends like messing around.
No, and that, trust me, wasn't the worst thing that was happening there at the time. Yeah.
No, the other thing is, like you say, you were like an undercooked 25-year-old. That's you were like the hero because you were one of the big stars. So to hear you consider yourself that, we'll talk more about like how people think about themselves versus how the world thinks about them. But that was the first time that like in a youthful industry that I felt like the older guy. I remember I joined Maker when I was engaged and I got married. And I remember there was one time when I went to a Maker party and I was hanging out. And there were like two employees, one talent, one who worked at the company who like hooked up. And I caught him like making out in the corner. And I remember thinking like, wow, this is crazy. Like these kids are hooking up. And I remember one of the other big talent turned to me. He's like, dude, are you an idiot? Like everyone's hooking up with everybody. Like you're just the only like married guy. Like what's wrong with you?
Yeah. It was, whenever I watched that Lords of Dogtown, the Z Boys documentary, it's like right when the skaters started getting sponsored, and it was like they were winning all those competitions, and it was just that like it was that moment before the drug abuse happened, and like everything was cherry, everyone was rocking it, and that's kind of what I remember, in that office.
Totally.
And yeah, and then we had our and that second half of the documentary moment, but it took a while,
Yeah, that's
we're all alive, thank God.
Touche. Yeah. No, there were some wild times, but I think a lot of people grew in that process, and it's just so funny to like think about the fact that it feels like yesterday, but it feels like a lifetime ago, and that you consider yourself to be undercooked at the time. I mean, it didn't appear to be the case, but one of the things I was going to say about you, going back to what you said a minute ago, there's sort of like two things that I think you sort of already acknowledged are almost in conflict, and I want to ask you about this. You basically talked about consistency being a super important theme for growth on YouTube, and probably just as any sort of human or creative. And you talked about it with podcasts now. But then I think that, one of the things I've always admired about you is you've had like an unwavering expectation or standard for what you were willing to do. So like on my side, when we first met, when it would come to brand deals per se, or like opportunities, you would only take the things that you believed in. And that was something that I think served you really well over the course of your career, because you didn't, quote, sell out. And you were your own like biggest critic. But do you think that like, forget the brand piece, think about the idea of like the balance between volume, like putting out a lot of content, and so I guess the idea of consistency versus like perfection, or the concept of like doing only what you think is cool. What's your like take on that?
Thank you. And yeah, it's still something that I don't really know how to balance. There was there's this relationship, and this is going to sound like real, like up my own ass about like making YouTube videos, but you'll have to just bear with me. But like when you do achieve some sort of success online, it doesn't matter if it's on YouTube or, Twitch or, Instagram or TikTok or whatever, there's this relationship that you have with the people that are consuming what it is that you're putting out. And the way I always thought about it was, you got to serve those people, but you also have to serve yourself. And if you're making the stuff that is what you're interested in, they will notice and they will always be on board. But what a lot of creators did was, I think, just kept trying to feed the beast, and it ended up, especially when you're trying to hit like a schedule, especially if it's a weekly schedule or multiple times a week, you're going to make a decision where you're going to upload something that you're just not on board with, just for the sake of uploading it because you said you would, and you're afraid. And I never was big on I don't want to be afraid of the people that I'm entertaining, or I don't want to feel like I owe them anything. But where I did take a little more care was, and like I kick myself for it. I left a lot of money on the table as far as like brand opportunities, just because it didn't feel authentic in the moment. Or, I always had this idea, is like every time I do a branded thing, I'm like trading in a little chip, like a dignity chip, and the audience kind of goes like, all right, Cass is getting paid on this one, and we'll let it go because we've gotten all this stuff. But like, just don't get crazy, Cass. And yeah, so there was a lot of, I felt like I had to be, part of what my appeal was when I did upload something, there was a standard, there's a standard in how I talk to babes at the beach, for sure. But there was a level of, I was okay with that going online because it was going to be of a certain quality. And I wasn't ever just, there was a small period. And by the way, like before I hit the man on the street stuff, I was doing a lot of stuff that I like just wish I could take back. But you kind of have to, in the beginning, you have to collaborate and do things with other people, you're going to be doing something that you don't necessarily think is super funny, but you know that it's for the good of growing. And so you take a lot of those hits. But when I felt like I took enough of those hits, I got very sort of protective over what it was I was doing, because I already did that and I didn't want to really keep doing that. And I wanted to cultivate an audience that was a little older. So there was kind of a chasm between the audience I wanted to have online versus maybe what it was originally, which was it skewed younger in the very beginning. And so I made the decision that I wanted to make content for people that were a little older, that something that I would like. And that took a while, because you have to shed a lot of there's going to be something you upload and they're like, this isn't good. I want to see you do the cinnamon challenge. And, and just like, I'm not going to do that. And this is going to be a weird sketch I'm going to upload. And it's like surreal and it's not going to really make any sense. And I want the people that are going to be into that watching it. And for the most part, I would categorize a lot of what I did was weird, maybe funny, not funny, but at least interesting. And I would take that all day over just like uploading something that I didn't have because I had to. Because I said, every Friday, come back. We'll be here. And that I took a big hit in branding opportunities. I took a big hit in subscriber numbers because I wasn't as consistent. But that was just my path. And it like really all came down to my mental health, And at the time I didn't realize it was probably, taking a beating in the way that it was, until I had some time away and I was able to kind of observe myself and also observe kind of what was happening with other people that were going through something very similar. And when you said, we grew up online, we literally did. There was some of the most embarrassing stuff I've done online, and then some of the most fulfilling stuff I've done online. And I'm 37 now, and like I still play around online. It's and it's funny because I just like a couple of weeks ago privated a lot of the stuff I did, because as I get older, a lot of the early YouTube stuff I just don't identify with, or I don't, my sensibilities have grown. I was like in my early to mid 20s when I started doing that stuff. I'm in my late 30s now. And like, of course, my sensibilities change, and like what I think is funny or what I want to represent myself has changed. And that's all. That was just me. There's people out there that kick ass every week. They put out quality stuff every week. They take branding. I mean, there are few of them, but like there are people out there that really, really do a great job with, like Rhett and Link, and Smosh. They're examples of brands that have weathered every storm. They know exactly what their voice is, and they've managed to be consistent. And like when I say consistent, I'm like at least a video a week for the last 12 to 13 years. I mean, that to me is that's inhuman. It's unreal. And those are like the people that I admire online, and I'm comfortable with my place in it.
One of the things that you did that I felt like was pretty pioneering in the space, like your Ask Kassem format for anyone listening, was basically you responding to comments, which I thought was like one of the really admirable formats of paying attention to your fans. And you would also dig yourself a lot. And I don't know, looking back, if you have any thoughts on whether or not you liked that or didn't like it. I mean, it was not like your hits driven videos, but it was a way to sustain and like really have your audience feel like they're on this journey with you. What do you think of when you look back at that format specifically?
I have a fondness for those videos. What really made those videos great, and those videos came about because, people that were playing the game correctly had the internet YouTube game. They had viewer response videos, and if you wanted to have like a really vibrant and cultivate like an audience that was, feverish over what you were making, you got to talk to them. And originally didn't want to do that kind of stuff because I liked kind of playing into a character and didn't want to have to like be quote unquote myself and like talk to, anyone. But we had, and it took a little while, but we had made this format where it was all shot on green screen. And the real genius behind it all was we had a very talented editor in Dan Flesher. And Dan Flesher was like a great editor, but he was also like an Adobe After Effects, like Photoshop whiz. And he essentially animated all this stuff. So we would stand on a green screen, act out all these like really stupid bits, take viewer response questions, and he'd spend the next day and a half turning it into like an actual world with like backgrounds and animated backgrounds and explosions and it was really cool. But since it was mainly on him, he was the workhorse of it. As soon as that person gets other work or feels like, yeah, that's enough, then that's kind of it, and I think we both kind of reached that conclusion together. But I have like the most fond memories of making it because it was every Monday, we'd come in after a weekend and like essentially boot up the studio and play music and like sit there and like my crew were my best friends and like everyone around we were all happy to see each other. And like, we knew we were kind of doing this very silly thing. But when people talk to me about my, the YouTube stuff I used to do, I get so many questions or just like people echoing the like, oh, I miss Ask Kassem, like more so than most of the other stuff I did. It had such a unique look and feel to it. I don't think I've seen anything like it since. And yeah, I loved doing it. At the time I was kind of like, I felt like it was a little bit like I was told I should be making this kind of thing. So it made me want to do it less because I have that issue with myself. But we did it for, 2 years straight, maybe a little more than that. And it was a really solid, most episodes were, and every, 1 out of every 5, I'd say was like a complete dud, but even the duds were still kind of funny. You could tell we're like Dan or me, we just weren't feeling it. And we're like, oh dude, like I gotta, I was standing on the screen, I gotta pretend like what's happening. Like, it was such a weird abstract moment, in time that we did. And it also just seems so weird to just talk about it in the podcast in like a retrospective sort of like, inside the actor's studio dialogue about it. But yeah, I really do think of it fondly. And I did private those videos, but I'm going through them and I'll be putting them, back online as more of like a time capsule, if anything else,
Yeah, that's awesome. And you already acknowledged this, but that was really a format where you showed the real you. There was no character. I mean, there was, the hyperbole of like making it funny with the green screen, but in general, it was just such a genuine format that I think honored your audience. And I felt like it was so indicative of like that special time at Maker. Cause I picture like John Na and like the whole crew that was involved. And like, it was such a good group of people who like really channeled creativity from each other. And
that's a great point. It was fun in the fact that, cause we had the crew and, even my cameraman was a personality on it. And we had so much fun working together that we took that sort of like the crew vibe and tried to do other things with it. Like we went on road trips, like Bigfoot hunting and ghost hunting. And we did those all because of what we learned on Ask Kassem, which is we're goofing around so much, but we're having fun and people see that and they get attached to the characters and like, they will watch a video and go, no one would ever see it and go, those guys just met, like we all have we had a great chemistry. And if anything, that was the best part of doing that Ask Kassem. Yeah.
Kind of bringing people to the present day. I mean, you always had such a long run on YouTube, and you've adopted to now pretty focused, it seems, on podcasts. I mean, you have a fantastic podcast with Jamie and Rob called Pajama Pants. Seems like you guys are having a lot of fun at that. Does podcasting remind you in some ways of the early days of YouTube, in the sense that it's just another now medium for creativity, or is it totally different? Like, do you have any parallels between the two, or do you just see it as a totally new thing?
There are parallels, there's what's similar about it is that there's a group of people working towards a goal, which is growing a thing on a weekly basis, and it's week to week on how it goes. The podcast has been absolutely fantastic, and it's really cool to grow friendships publicly. Me and Rob, so I do it with Robert Iler and Jamie-Lynn Sigler, and they were AJ and Meadow Soprano on The Sopranos. And I knew Rob because I met him on a pilot years ago, and we became fast friends. But I didn't meet Jamie until episode 1 of the podcast. And we had texted a little bit before, but we really didn't get to know each other until we sat down at a table together. And that's interesting to me. And that's like cool. And I think, a year in, you can really see the difference in the relationships and like how we communicate. Because, in the beginning, there's a lot of awkwardness. You don't really know like where somebody's sensibilities are, like where they're bordered, like, or boundaries. And so you're kind of playing it safe. And so as the show goes on, and we're in our second year, you, I think, see like a much thicker like a dynamic that's there that wasn't necessarily there in the beginning, but we wouldn't have got here if it wasn't for the beginning. And so growing something without the interest on making it super successful right at first is kind of how YouTube started. We made YouTube videos mostly just for fun in the very beginning. It then became, a thing where we turned into a business. But right now, I think what attracts me to the podcast is that part of it is the interpersonal relationship that I have with the people I do the podcast with, and with the people that listen. We have, people that are into it, which is great. Like I didn't know it was. It's just cool. It really is. And it's so, we just started from zero with like no help. We didn't sign with a big podcast network. We didn't, do that thing where you go on like a billion podcasts to promote it. We're just kind of just very much staying in our lane and enjoying it. And I enjoy it like every week more and more, which is great.
That's awesome. Going back to the sort of process of starting. So much of this podcast is designed to have people find inspiration as far as pursuing things that they want to do. And creativity is obviously one of them that usually rises high to the top of the list. And I don't know what I'd rather channel my advice through people like you and just say, what would you say to someone who wants to get started in putting out content or doing something with their personal brand on any medium, knowing that the beginning might be kind of like those early days of going to comedy clubs that were half full and feeling like, is anybody there? Why am I doing this?
Totally. I am notoriously, I get hung up on not acting, right? I will have a great idea and I will find every way to talk myself out of a great idea. And I know people that are listening, there's a lot of you out there, and know that I am one of those people. I will think an idea to death before it even has a moment to survive. And the thing that I am just now learning is that it's okay to be not as great as you want to be, but it's more important to just do something and start. Because when you start something, it'll it'll evolve and get better and change naturally. If you're coming out the gate and you really are a perfectionist and you really want it to look and feel a certain way, you can control a certain amount of that. But after a while, you'll have, I mean, if you guys have been trying to, specifically if we're talking about a podcast, there are hours of me sitting and talking that are just audio files on my computer that have never been uploaded or seen the light of day, because I listen to it and I go, that's stupid. Or like, that's, no one's going to want to listen to that. Or that's, you didn't cover the right stuff. There's so much of that. The times that I've been most fulfilled are the moments where I took a chance and I wasn't afraid to be bad or embarrassed by something. And that has to happen. You will be embarrassed. You will be bad at something that you've never done before. But it's the best time to do it because everyone is doing it. Everyone collectively in the beginning is kind of bad together. So the more reps you get in, the quicker you get out in front of, I just say, just know that it's probably going to suck for a while, but you have to trudge through that, even when you hear somebody's first pod and you go, oh, that's great. I guarantee you to that person, there's a million things wrong with it. There's a billion reasons why they shouldn't have uploaded it, but they did anyways. And that to me, taking that first step opens a door. It's like unlocks something in your head, and it allows more creativity pour through instead of this like dam that you've built of all these different reasons why it won't be successful.
Yeah, I think that also people are their own worst critics. And when I look back and I'll ask you point blank, I mean, you mentioned privating videos that on one end, if you don't agree with the way you were talking in the video, that's one thing. But if there's a video that you were ever embarrassed by, and I don't know if you said that, as a person who's not only a friend of you, but a fan of you, I would say it's always like funny that your worst video in your mind, I could watch and say like, yeah, okay, fine. Can you cite a time, and I'm not saying embarrassment is not warranted for anybody, but can you cite a time in your own career where your thoughts of something that embarrassed you hypothetically, or actually even meant anything, like that there were any like repercussions or any like real element of embarrassment?
Not as much as I thought they would, you always, like you just said, are your biggest critic, and nothing anyone's ever said to me has been as bad as like the nightmare scenario in my own mind, of course there's stuff that happened, and then you go, yeah, like that person's right. Or like, but that's a great point. It really never is as bad as you think it's going to be, unless you do something just awful. But I'm assuming most people aren't. But if you go to YouTube right now, there's a lot of awful stuff, but there's also a lot of great stuff too. So I think there's, what I think about now is, which is funny, is like, I want to have kids. And when my kids, say I have one in the next 3 years, and then in 10 years, that kid's going to be 7 or 8, and they're going to be old enough to where they're able to operate, like a phone and a tablet, and they'll be able to, like Jamie's son, Jack, who just turned 3, he knows how to like go to the search bar on YouTube and then use the voice feature and then talk into the search. And then like, so he can search it. And I'm worried about what sort of like impression I would leave as like a dad, and it's so stupid because that's one person in a sea of like however many that would be interested in it. But I still want to do things that are funny. I just want to do things that I would be proud to show someone that knew me,
I think that's really admirable. And it's being a dad, that sentiment totally resonates with me. It's funny with your content, not to be like over analytical, but I always felt like fundamentally you're a good person. And even if you did things that were edgy per se, that it was never really at the expense of someone else. I mean, you would go far, like meaning on Going Deep or even on, California On, like you would have some lines that could be deemed as offensive to the recipient. But at the same time, like they knew you. And I think that when the camera turned off, the way that you are as a human, let them know that it was truly just humor. So I think that like contextually, your brand online, anybody who knows it knows it's great. Like, I mean, I think that's the hardest part. And I'm not trying to like overthink what you said here.
Yeah.
How do you define what line you consider to be like your brand ethics when it comes to what content you're putting out?
That line changes, every year I get older. It recedes, much like my hairline. I am less willing to push a boundary for the sake of a laugh. And I would rather try and find something more interesting, or like, there's like, the way I think about it is there's a lot of like, when you're talking to somebody, especially if it's man on the street, somebody says something, and then you have like a choice of replies to that person, right? There's the front door reply, which is a lot of people will just do the front door reply, like, oh, that's crazy. And then there's like the back door reply, which is something that's like, ooh, that's a little edgy. And like, I wasn't necessarily expecting that. And then there's where I would like to live. And I don't know how often I get there, but I'd like to be a side door, or even like, basement door reply, which is just more clever, doesn't necessarily have to offend anyone or be shocking. And those moments are much harder to capture because timing's a huge part of it. But I don't want to live in a world where I feel like I'm making somebody uncomfortable for the sake of, views or anything like that. I've done that enough. And I've been very lucky because they're, for the most part, it's all been pretty tame stuff, and people have sort of come to expect that. And so everyone's been, I have maybe one or two people out of the thousands I've talked to may have had a real issue, and then we still worked it out, And if somebody ever sent me a message and was like, hey, you put this video up, and I'm like, I'm not cool with it, I was always very cool to be like, no problem, I'll private it or re-edit it or do something. So I am interested in those sort of side door replies more, as I get older. And I might just, it might mean that a man on the street's not necessarily the path for that. It take a different format. And I've become very comfortable with like hosting stuff, which gives me that sort of like, well, you can get my personality out without having to still have it like centered around an actual subject, as opposed to kind of just being on the street talking with somebody and trying to make a moment funny,
Yep. So I'm going to do some rapid fire questions. Fondest memory of a video that you've been a part of?
There was a video that we did, which I mentioned earlier, but we did like an hour-long ghost hunt video. And we investigated this place called Preston Castle, and it was me and my crew, and like among the crew was my brother and all my friends. And there was a moment where my brother and John, my camera, they got so scared, and they freaked themselves out because it was like pitch black. It was like 2 a.m., 3 a.m.
Where is this place?
It's in Northern California somewhere. I forget the city, but
yep.
We psyched each other out so much. I just remember I was like upstairs, and I just remember hearing like a thud and like screaming, and when we watched the footage back, it was like my brother had fallen. He had this sort of little device that supposedly like ghosts sending you words and messages. And then it was like, he read it, he like fell, he tripped, and then he read it, and it was like, get out or something. And he just ran, and one person scares another person. And it was one of the hardest of, like laughed. And it was a culmination of like a really long week. And, you're there with your buddies, and it was just like exactly what I set out to do, when we left. It was really fun.
Classic. What year was this roughly? Like, this was towards the end, right?
2015. Yeah. And that's still up on my YouTube channel. And we did a Bigfoot one too. And it was very similar. We had anytime we can remove ourselves from the normal, the studio or, Venice and go do something where we're kind of all forced to cram into a vehicle together and just be around each other all day. We get annoyed but we also have the best time too.
Yep. Next question is, you wouldn't believe this happened, and it could be any experience in your life or when you were shooting something.
There was that same video, and in that week we were shooting a ghost thing, but I had what I thought was a real ghost encounter that didn't make it into the video. It just happened while I was asleep. And just the long and short of it was, and I've said this on other pods before, but essentially we got to do an overnight stay on this aircraft carrier. And they had all these ghost hunting teams come spend the night. And during the day, it was like a ghost hunting convention. It was bonkers. But at night, you spend the night where the crew used to sleep in the barracks. And in the middle of the night, after filming all day, where I just crashed into a bunk, just kind of fall asleep. And at 3 a.m., I had the weirdest, cold static electricity just all over. And my body's being lifted, the center of my stomach's being lifted up. And then my sleeping bag was being unzipped all at the same time. And I was screaming. I was trying to scream out, help me, but nobody came to my aid. That we had been drinking that night. So I haven't put too much sort of it was definitely a ghost hunt, but I've also I used to drink all the time. I've never had that happen, those feelings. And, so it was a really weird night. And I talked to one of the people that worked there the next day. They were like, oh yeah, we've had that happen a ton of times, but there's supposedly a ghost down there that's if you sleep in the wrong bunk, he tries to take you out of it. And, so I was just, it's just one of those things where I like to think I'm open-minded to that stuff, but I'm not sort of foo-foo into it and a huge believer, but it's something weird happened. And it just so happened while we're making this sort of parody ghost hunting video, so I don't know. Maybe I just was drinking. Who knows?
So best advice you've received, and if there's somebody you want to credit for it, go for that.
I don't know who said this to me, but somebody said, not everyone's going to love you. It's important, especially if you're trying to do something online or creative. Not everyone is going to be your biggest fan. You can't control other people's feelings. You can only control what you put out there and how you react to people. But it's such a solid piece because sometimes you think, you get in your own head about things and you go, why wouldn't everyone like me? And that's just not how that works. And it helps you sleep better at night,
Yeah. Do you feel like as you give advice to other people that's a big hindrance for people, is feeling like they need to do something that appeals to everyone, and then if they get that little bit of negative feedback, that it kind of stifles them from progressing?
Absolutely. One of the worst parts and best parts about being online is you get that instant feedback. And, for the most part, I've had a lot of positive, but there's also been negative, and you'll remember the negative far longer than you will with the positive. And that negative will eat at you until you give it, all your power. And so don't try and make, content that you want everyone to love, because that probably won't be that interesting, and it just won't happen. If you just show interest in something, it's like a good documentary. A good documentary will take a subject I have no interest or idea about, and it'll make me interested in it because of the things I didn't know that I came to know. And so I think if you take that same approach with creating, whether it be podcasts or merch or just, videos, that's the best thing you could probably, keep in mind when you're starting.
Definitely. Book recommendation.
I'm not a huge book guy. I'm a comic book guy. And so I'll give you two. I'm reading Dune right now, which is great sci-fi. And there's a movie coming out by Denis Villeneuve. But also, as far as graphic novels or comic books go, I just finished Paper Girls, which it's by Brian K. Vaughan, and it's about 4 paper girls, and it's like a Stranger Things-esque but I'd say probably better time travel-y sort of thing. And it's really great. Cyberpunk, the genre is kind of out in the mainstream right now. So Transmetropolitan is probably my favorite piece of cyberpunk fiction. And that's one of my favorite comic books out there. And I highly recommend that if you're into comics and stuff.
Cool. Movies or movie?
I'll just tell you the one I just most recently watched, which I really enjoyed. And we were just talking about documentaries that really, we had no idea we would enjoy. It's called Some Kind of Heaven, and it's about a retirement village in Florida. And it's a really fun slice of life doc about this retirement community, and it's produced by Darren Aronofsky, and it's really well done, and it's beautifully shot, and you have all kinds of feelings when you see the sort of the main characters that they follow in it, and it just came out, I think, 3 weeks ago. Highly worth a rent.
Awesome. What should people listen to? Music, podcasts, aside from Pajama Pants, which I have to plug again, which is great.
Besides Pajama Pants, music is so funny. What I'm listening to at the moment, there's like a local natives and Sharon Van Etten sort of like collab that they did. I forget the name of it, but it's on like an EP they call Sour Lemon. And I really like local natives. And I just think it's like real easy to listen to, and it's kind of sweepy, and you could tap your foot to it. And I love Sharon Van Etten. And so it was great that they both kind of collabed on a song, and it's really great. I like it.
Very cool. And then California curation for those who live here or come here. Any random places, restaurants, places to check out that are obscure that you recommend?
It's such a bummer, dude. My favorite Italian restaurant closed. It was down on the end of Washington there. It's called Casa Otto. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it was like, you'd walk in, all the waiters are like, everyone's speaking Italian, and the food was really good. And I think they just got hit with the panty hit them hard. And that's kind of a bummer. So I'm trying to find a replacement restaurant that serves up the same quality pasta. As far as places go, I grew up in Southern California, but I did a lot of like off-roading as a kid. So like I think of like Pismo and places like Glamis, but I don't think I would go to play like somewhere like Glamis or Ocotillo Wells like now, unless like you have like a flat bill hat and black socks. And but now I go to places like Ojai, like the Ojai Valley Inn. I love to bouge out for a weekend, just in front of the pool, or Palm Springs, those are places
what a transition we've gone to. What a way to end. I don't want to end on bougie Kaz. So I was going to end there, but I'll say this. Let's just end by shouting out anything that you're doing, any parting words of advice for people, and then any shout outs to anyone who's sort of inspired you along the way. I know there's a lot there. My point is, you've done a lot of people have been in your circle. Any sort of parting thoughts for the world?
I appreciate anyone that's watched anything I've ever done and kind of stuck with me, because I'm, like I've mentioned, I've just been so inconsistent. Nothing but appreciation for anyone that's just put up with me over the last few years and seen me go from like an undercooked guy who loved to drink and smoke weed to like a maybe semi-cooked sober dude in his late 30s. So yeah, I appreciate it. And I appreciate you having me on and helping me with a multitude of things over the years and being so cool. And like I said, you're one of those few people I think that I've gotten to meet along the way. And when you meet good people, you just got to keep them close and they're only there to enrich your life. And I appreciate you even me and wearing the shirt and asking me to come on your pod. All the love is reciprocated, buddy.
Yes, I love it. Well, much love back to you. And I share the same sentiment. You're a gift to the world and a great human. And you've definitely graced a lot of people with your character and humor and, good nature. It's awesome that you acknowledge those who have stayed with you, because I think that when people see someone that they're a fan of, aside from, their friends, the fans will want to be there too. So, and you've always given back to them. So keep doing that, and tell people where they can find you.
Yeah. Thanks for that, by the way. It's really nice. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and our podcast is called Pajama Pants, and we're on YouTube and Instagram as well.
What are your personal handles?
Kassem G on Twitter, Kassem G backwards on Instagram, and YouTube Kassem G.
Very cool. Well, thanks for your time today. Always a pleasure, man. And
Thanks, man.
Everybody go tune into Pajama Pants. You'll like it. And someday I can get to their level, hopefully.
Yeah. Thanks again. And thanks everyone for listening.
Cheers, man. See you soon.
See you, buddy.
What an absolute legend Kassem G is. I hope you all enjoyed that. Check him out at G Messick on Instagram, at Kassem G on Twitter. Watch his shows on G4. Tune in to the Pajama Pants Podcast, which is fantastic. Big inspiration for this podcast. Shout out to Rob and Jamie. I can't get enough of Kassem's great content. May he always continue to put out new stuff for all of us to enjoy. You can find me on social at Pelosi, at Shared Ingredients on Instagram. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, like, comment, share, do whatever you can do to pass the good word about this. I really appreciate your support. May we all hope that a t-shirt this rad comes out again someday. Kassem, you're the best. Thank you for all the laughs and inspiration. See you next time. Yay!